Have you ever walked across a suspension bridge and wondered what's holding you up? Not the towers, not the road, but the cables. Those quiet strands of twisted steel stretched across the sky. They don't make a sound. They don't move. But without them, everything falls. How can something so thin carry the weight of an entire city? How do they survive storms, earthquakes, even time itself? The answer lies in fire, in force, in an invisible journey. From deep underground to the sky above. A journey of science, sweat, and silent strength. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most overlooked marvels of engineering. Stay with me, because once you see what these cables go through, you'll never look at a bridge or an elevator the same way again. Let's begin. The cable beneath your feet. Every day, millions of people walk across bridges without a second thought. Morning commuters sipping coffee, children on field trips, tourists snapping photos, all trusting something they can't even see. Steel cables, stretched taut between towers, silent, motionless, but holding up thousands of tons of steel, concrete, and lives. Take the Golden Gate Bridge, for example. It looks graceful, almost elegant, but what holds it up are two massive main cables, each as thick as a man's thigh, made of over 27,000 individual wires. Wires so thin, they look like something you find in a notebook spiral. But together, they could lift an aircraft. Think about that. Something thinner than your finger multiplied thousands of times becomes strong enough to carry the weight of a city. It's not just strength, it's precision, it's trust. Because every person who steps onto that bridge, consciously or not, is placing their life in the hands of steel. But where does that strength come from? How does a raw, rusty chunk of earth become something so powerful, so dependable, so vital? To understand that, we have to go back nearly 200 years, to a dark mine in Germany where it all began. The forgotten invention that changed the year was 1834. In the heart of Germany's Harz Mountains, deep underground, miners were fighting a daily battle, not just with rock and darkness, but with gravity itself. Back then, they relied on hemp ropes to lower and lift heavy carts of coal and ore, ropes that frayed, snapped, and too often killed. One winter morning, a loaded cart plunged down a shaft after the main rope split without warning. 3 men lost their lives. It wasn't the first time, and if nothing changed, it wouldn't be the last. That tragedy reached the ears of a young mining engineer named Wilhelm Albert. He asked a simple, radical question. What if we use wire instead of rope? People laughed. Wire was stiff, brittle, and hard to handle. But Albert believed in the idea. He twisted multiple strands of steel wire together, creating something stronger than any rope had ever been. Flexible, durable, and nearly impossible to break. He tested it on the job. No fraying, no snapping, no more lives lost. What began as an act of desperation became one of the greatest industrial breakthroughs in history. And yet most people today have never heard his name. Wilhelm Albert didn't build a bridge. He built trust, strand by strand. And over the next 2 centuries, his invention would reshape our world, one cable at a time. But what makes these cables so uniquely powerful? How can something so small resist the crushing force of mountains and machines? Let's look closer at the science behind the strength. Tiny giants. Why steel cables can hold a mountain? At first glance, a steel cable doesn't look like much. Just a long, twisted rope of gray metal. No glowing cord. No humming engine. No moving parts. And yet it can hold up a 10-lane highway. Suspend a 1,000-foot span of bridge in midair. Lift a fully loaded elevator 100 stories into sky. Over and over again. So what's the secret? It's not just the steel. It's the structure. Each cable is made of hundreds, sometimes thousands, of individual wires. And these wires aren't bundled randomly. They're twisted delicately, precisely, into a helical pattern that distributes force evenly across the entire length. Imagine this. One wire by itself might snap under a few hundred pounds, but twist 100 of them together, and suddenly it can hold hundreds of tons without breaking a sweat. It's like fingers in a fist. Individually, they're weak. Together, they're unbreakable. And that's not all. Steel cables are designed to be both strong and flexible. They bend with the wind, adjust with movement, absorb shock. They adapt, but never yield. This unique combination of traits is what engineers call high strength-to-weight ratio. In plain terms, tiny cable, giant power. Here's a fun fact. A steel cable just 2 inches thick can lift more than 500,000 pounds. That's the weight of a blue whale. But how do we get from raw ore to this incredible structure? It starts far away from bridges and buildings, deep underground, in the silent belly of the earth. Born in fire, the art of making perfect steel. Steel doesn't come into the world strong. It has to be made that way. Through pressure, heat, and transformation, it begins with iron, dull, heavy, unremarkable. Rocks pulled from the ground by machines the size of houses. But inside those rocks lies potential, waiting to be unlocked. At the steel mill, the real alchemy begins. Massive electric arc furnaces, as tall as 5-story buildings, roar to life. Inside, tons of raw or mixed with recycled scrap metal. Graphite electrodes plunge into mixture, releasing a storm of electricity. Thousands of degrees of heat, turning solid metal into a river of molten orange. It looks like lava. It sounds like thunder. It feels alive. But fire alone isn't enough. To make steel that's strong, flexible, and resistant to corrosion, engineers add precise amount of other elements. Manganese for strength, nickel for weather resistance, chromium to fight rust, silicon for flexibility. It's not guesswork. It's chemistry. It's precision at the atomic level. While the steel boils, a layer of slag rises to the top like cream and milk. This slag absorbs impurities, scrubbing the steel clean. Only when the composition is perfect does the metal move on. And even then the steel is still glowing, still hot enough to melt bone. But that heat, tamed, directed, is what makes the next step possible. From chaos comes control. From fire comes form. But how do you turn a river of molten metal into something that can hold up a skyscraper? You start by shaping it, one roll at a time, shaping the unbreakable. The molten steel, still glowing like the sun, is poured into copper mold, where water-cooled walls freeze the surface in seconds. From liquid fire comes form. Long, red-hot blocks called billets, each several meters long, slide out like glowing loaves of bread. But this is only the beginning. The billets are fed into giant rolling mills, where colossal steel rollers, each as big as a car, flatten, stretch, and compress the metal again and again. With every pass, the shape changes. Square becomes rectangular. Rectangular becomes round. Rough becomes smooth. But it's not just the outside that's changing. Inside, the grain structure of the steel, the way its atoms line up, is being realigned. Stronger, denser, more unified. This is where steel becomes unbreakable. It's easy to forget that these machines, towering, roaring, shaking the ground, are not just brute force. They are precise, measured to the millimeter, guided by lasers, monitored by computers, controlled by human hands that understand both the art and the science of steel. From these rolling lines come semi-finished bars, still hot, still powerful, but now ready for the next challenge. The challenge of transformation. Because now those thick bars must become threads. Hair-thin wires. Perfectly smooth, unbelievably strong. That's the next chapter, where strength is drawn, not forged. When steel meets the elements, steel may be strong, but nature is relentless. Salt
The
water,
testing surprised
rain,
me.
heat, ice, acid in the air. Even the simple passage of time, each one slowly chipping away at the toughest materials on Earth, left unprotected. Even the finest steel cable will rust, corrode, and fail. That's why every wire, before it becomes part of a cable, must be armored, not with more metal, but with chemistry. It starts with a bath, a soak in mild acid to clean the surface, removing oil, dust, even microscopic rust. What's left is pure, bare steel, vulnerable but ready. Then comes the shape. Some wires are dipped into molten zinc. a process called galvanization, coating them in a layer that fends off rust like a suit of armor. Others are passed through polymer coatings, forming a plastic skin that seals out air, salt, and chemicals. Every coating is tested, every inch inspected, because even a single air bubble no bigger than a pinhead can become a beachhead for corrosion. And when these cables are holding up bridges, wind turbines, elevators, failure is not an option. There's a story from a coastal bridge in Japan, where engineers discovered that a hairline crack in the outer coating of a cable had allowed salt water to creep in. Over years, it silently corroded dozens of cars inside, until one day, under heavy traffic, part of the bridge sagged. No one died, but it was a warning. Steel is strong, but only if it's protected. That's why, even after coating, the wires aren't done. They still have to prove themselves through testing, twisting, and trials that push them to the very edge. And that's what we'll see next. The final test, breaking the unbreakable. It's not enough to look strong. Steel is to prove it. Before any cable ever lifts an elevator, holds up a bridge, or spins in a wind turbine, it must face the gauntlet. In a quiet testing facility, away from the roar of furnaces and rolling mills, cables are brought in not to be admired, but to be broken. The first test is brute force. A massive hydraulic machine pulls a cable with increasing pressure, more and more and more, until it finally snaps. The sound is like a gunshot. The goal? To measure its breaking point. How much can this cable take before it fails? Then comes a bending test. The cable is twisted back and forth, again and again, hundreds, sometimes thousands of times. It simulates wind, vibration, years of real-world work. Microscopic cameras watch for cracks. Sensors listen for changes in tension. If the cable shows any sign of weakness, it's rejected. No second chances. Because in the real world, there's no room for almost. There's a story from the skyscraper elevator shaft in New York. During testing, engineers found a tiny flaw, an internal misalignment invisible to the eye. It passed the first test, but not the bending rig. That cable was scrapped on the spot. Why? Because that one elevator serves 2,000 people a day. When you're holding human live perfection is the only standard. And for cables that do pass,
is not an option.
They're coiled like sleeping giants. Labeled, tracked, protected, then loaded onto trucks, ready to journey across oceans, deserts, and cities. But even then, their job hasn't started. That comes next. The silent heroes of modern civilization. You see them everywhere, and yet you never really see them. Steel cables don't ask for attention. They don't shine. They don't speak. But without them, our world simply wouldn't work. They hold up our bridges. They pull our elevators skyward. They power our cranes, oil rigs, and wind farms. They keep cities moving, quietly, invisibly, faithfully. Every cable is a promise, a thread of trust between man and machine, forged in fire, stretched under pressure, tested without mercy, and deployed where failure is not an option. They are the silent heroes of modern life. So the next time you ride a glass elevator or walk across a bridge suspended high above water, pause, look down, not in fear, but in awe, because under your feet is steel that once lived in fire, steel that endured, steel that holds not just weight, but the weight of responsibility. And now I want to hear from you. Backhand index pointing right. What part of this journey surprised you the most? The fire? The testing? The trust? Leave a comment below, and let's give these silent giants the recognition they deserve. And if you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There are more hidden marvels out there. Let's uncover them together